Now let's begin. Ryan McCann had learned long ago that silence could be louder than any argument. He stood in the back of the funeral home chapel, watching his wife Christy check her phone for the third time in 10 minutes, while their 11-year-old son Lee sat between them with red-rimmed eyes. The boy had loved his great-grandfather Edwin with the kind of pure devotion that only children can manage, spending every Saturday for the past 3 years in the old man's workshop, learning about locks, keys, and the stories they held. Edwin McCann had died quietly in his sleep at 87, his calloused hands finally still after 40 years of working with metal and mechanisms. The funeral was small. Ryan's father had passed when Ryan was young, and Edwin had been the only real father figure he'd known. Most of the attendees were former clients, elderly men and women who remembered when Edwin had installed their first deadbolts or rescued them from locked cars. The Stark family occupied an entire pew near the front, though Ryan suspected they'd only come to ensure the old man was truly dead. Christy's father, Gordon, sat with his arms crossed, his expensive suit seeming out of place among the modest crowd. Her mother, Maxine, wore black pearls and an expression of practiced grief that didn't reach her eyes. Carlton, Christy's older brother, kept checking his Rolex as if timing how long he'd have to endure this display of lower-class mourning. Ryan had married into the Stark family 8 years ago, back when he still believed love could bridge the gap between his working-class upbringing and their old-money world. He'd been a project manager for a construction company then, ambitious and hopeful. Now he managed a small hardware store in town, a steady job that would never impress the Starks but kept food on the table and gave him time with Lee. How much longer? Christy whispered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her clutch. It's your grandfather's funeral, Lee said quietly, his voice cracking. Show some respect. Christy's eyes flashed, but before she could respond, the service ended. People filed past Edwin's closed casket, and Ryan placed his hand on the polished wood, remembering Saturday mornings in the cluttered workshop, the smell of machine oil and metal shavings, Edwin's patient voice explaining how every lock was a puzzle, every key a solution. He taught me everything worth knowing, Ryan murmured. Lee pressed close to his side. He said the same thing about you, Dad. The will reading was scheduled for the following afternoon at the Stark Mansion, a sprawling estate in the historic district that had been in the family for 4 generations. Vernon Reed, the family attorney, had insisted on reading Edwin's will there rather than his office, an unusual request that should have been Ryan's first warning. The mansion's library smelled of leather and old money. Gordon Stark sat in his usual wing chair like a king on a throne, while Maxine perched beside him, her smile thin and anticipating. Carlton sprawled on the leather sofa, his wife Melody beside him, both looking bored. Christy had positioned herself near her parents, leaving Ryan and Lee to stand awkwardly by the door like servants awaiting instruction. Vernon Reed was a compact man in his 60s with silver hair and the careful neutrality of someone who'd spent decades managing wealthy people's secrets. He opened his briefcase with precise movements and pulled out a single envelope. Edwin McCann's estate is quite straightforward, Vernon began. He owned his workshop and the small apartment above it, both mortgage-free. He had a savings account with approximately $47,000, and his truck, a 1998 Ford F-150. That's it. Carlton laughed. 40 years of working with his hands, and that's all he scraped together? Ryan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. The workshop and apartment are to be sold, Vernon continued, with proceeds divided between Ryan McCann and the Westside Community Center, where Mr. McCann volunteered teaching lock repair to at-risk youth. The savings account goes to Ryan. The truck goes to Ryan. How generous, Maxine said dryly. I'm sure Ryan can finally upgrade from that embarrassment he drives. And for his great-grandson, Lee McCann, Vernon's voice carried a strange note Ryan couldn't identify. Edwin leaves his most precious possession. Lee straightened, hope flickering across his face. Edwin had promised him something special, had told him repeatedly that he was leaving him the key to everything. Vernon reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a single tarnished key. It was old, the kind that might open a steamer trunk or an antique door, with ornate teeth and a bow worn smooth from handling. Numbers were scratched into the metal, 1847. The room erupted in laughter. A rusty key? Carlton howled, slapping his knee. That's his inheritance? The old coot left the kid a piece of garbage. Melody pressed her hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Oh my God, I can't, this is too much. This is what happens, Gordon said, his voice heavy with satisfaction. When you come from nothing, you leave nothing. Lee's face had gone pale, his hands trembling as he reached for the box. Tears spilled down his cheeks, not from disappointment, but from humiliation, as the laughter continued to roll over them in waves. Christy looked away, her cheeks flushed, and Ryan knew she was embarrassed, not for Lee, but of him, of the McCann family's modest legacy, of being associated with people who thought a rusty key might mean something. Ryan took the box from Lee's shaking hands and examined the key. The number wasn't random. Edwin never did anything without purpose. 40 years as a locksmith meant this key had a story, a destination, a meaning. But more than that, the old man had called it his most precious possession. We're leaving, Ryan said quietly. Oh, don't be dramatic, Maxine said, still smiling. It's just a bit of fun. Surely you can't have expected. We're leaving. Ryan's voice was steel. He placed his hand on Lee's shoulder and guided him toward the door. Ryan. Christy's voice was sharp. Don't make a scene. He turned to look at his wife, really look at her, and saw a stranger. When had she become one of them? When had she started measuring worth in dollars instead of character? Your family just humiliated our son over his great-grandfather's final gift, Ryan said. And you're worried about a scene? Vernon Reed cleared his throat, standing abruptly. I'll walk you out. They moved through the mansion's ornate hallways in silence. Lee's quiet sobs the only sound. Outside, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and coming rain. Vernon paused on the front steps, adjusting his glasses. Mr. McCann, he said quietly. Edwin came to my office 6 months ago. He was very specific about how his will should be read and where. He also gave me this. Vernon handed Ryan a sealed envelope with his name written in Edwin's shaky handwriting. He said to give it to you after, and only if the Starks reacted exactly as he predicted they would. Ryan stared at the envelope. He knew they'd laugh. He counted on it. Vernon's expression was carefully neutral, but something gleamed in his eyes. Edwin McCann was many things, Mr. McCann, but a fool was never one of them. Keys were his business. He knew that what matters isn't the lock you can see, but the one you don't know exists. With that cryptic statement, Vernon returned to his car, leaving Ryan and Lee standing in the circular driveway. Inside Ryan's truck, that embarrassment Maxine had mocked, Lee finally broke down completely, his face buried in his hands. Ryan pulled him close, letting the boy cry against his shoulder, feeling his own rage building like a storm. The Starks had spent years making him feel small, inadequate, less than. He'd endured it for Christy, for the marriage he'd believed in. But watching them mock his son, mock Edwin's memory, had broken something fundamental. Dad, Lee whispered, why did great-grandpa leave me just a key? Ryan opened the envelope with steady hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Edwin's precise handwriting. Ryan, if you're reading this, they showed their true faces. Good. You needed to see what I've known for years. The Starks think locks and keys are simple. You turn one, the other opens. They're wrong. I've spent 40 years learning that the real art isn't in opening locks. It's in knowing which doors should stay closed, and which secrets are worth keeping. The number on the key is an address. 1847, Riverside Drive. Go there with Lee. Everything I've built, everything I've learned, everything I've kept safe, it's waiting. But Ryan, before you open that door, understand this. Some keys don't just open locks. They open cages. You're stronger than you know, son. Show them what the McCann men are made of. With love and faith, Edwin. Ryan read the letter twice, then handed it to Lee. The boy's tears slowed as he processed his great-grandfather's words. When he looked up, something had changed in his expression. The humiliation was still there, but it was being forged into something harder. 1847, Riverside Drive, Lee said. That's across town, in the warehouse district. Tomorrow, Ryan promised. We'll go tomorrow. That night, Christy came home late, smelling of wine and her mother's perfume. Ryan was in Lee's room, and they were researching 1847, Riverside Drive on his laptop. The property records showed it was a commercial building, purchased 40 years ago by E. McCann Holdings. A company named Ryan had never heard his grandfather mention. "You're being ridiculous," Christy said from the doorway. "It's just an old key. My family didn't mean anything by it." Ryan closed the laptop carefully. "Your family humiliated our son. They were just surprised. A key isn't exactly. Your grandfather wasn't a fool, Christy. Neither was mine." She sighed. That particular sound she made when she thought he was being unreasonable. "Fine. Chase your wild goose chase. But when you find nothing but an empty storage unit or some old junk, don't expect sympathy from me." After she left, Lee looked at his father. What if she's right? What if there's nothing there? Ryan thought about Edwin's patient hands, teaching Lee how to pick a lock, explaining that every mechanism had a purpose. He thought about 40 years of work, of secrets kept and trust earned. "Then we'll know," Ryan said. "But your great-grandpa never did anything without a reason. He left you that key because it means something. And whatever we find tomorrow, we're going to honor his memory by seeing this through." Together? Together. Neither of them slept much that night. Ryan lay in the guest room. He'd been sleeping there for months, another sign of his failing marriage, and thought about Vernon Reed's words. Keys were his business. He knew that what matters isn't the lock you can see, but the one you don't know exists. What had Edwin known? What had he kept locked away? And why had he wanted the Starks to reveal themselves before Ryan discovered it? The questions churned through Ryan's mind until dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. It was Saturday, and the hardware store was closed. Lee was already awake, the rusty key clutched in his hand, when Ryan knocked on his door. "Ready?" Ryan asked. Lee nodded, his jaw set with determination that reminded Ryan painfully of Edwin. "Let's go see what great-grandpa left us." They drove through town in the early morning quiet, past the Stark mansion with its manicured lawns and iron gates, through the historic district with its old money and older secrets, and finally into the warehouse district where Riverside Drive ran along the water. Number 1847 was a three-story brick building, weathered but solid, with narrow windows and a heavy steel door. The architecture was from the 1940s, industrial, and built to last. A faded sign above the entrance read, "Riverside Storage and Security." Ryan parked in the empty lot. His hands were steady, but his heart hammered as Lee approached the door. There was a modern deadbolt, and below it, an antique keyhole that perfectly matched the rusty key's profile. "You should do it," Ryan said. "He left it to you." Lee inserted the key with hands that only trembled slightly. It slid home with the solid click of precision engineering, and when he turned it, the lock opened with a satisfying thunk that spoke of quality mechanics and careful maintenance. The door swung inward on silent hinges. Vernon Reed was standing in the lobby, his briefcase at his feet, his mouth open in shock. He'd clearly arrived just before them, and whatever he'd seen inside had stunned him speechless. "Mr. McCann," Vernon breathed. "I had no idea. Edwin never told me. He just said I should be here when you opened the door, but I never imagined." Ryan stepped past him and stopped. The lobby was modest, just an entry with a desk and a hallway leading deeper. But the walls were covered with photographs. Hundreds of them, carefully labeled and dated. And Ryan recognized the subjects. Gordon Stark shaking hands with a man whose face was familiar from fraud investigations. Carlton Stark accepting a briefcase outside a building that had been raided 3 years ago for antiquities smuggling. Maxine Stark at a gallery opening, standing beside paintings Ryan now recognized from a museum theft unsolved for a decade. But it wasn't just photographs. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled with dates. A large corkboard displayed a timeline spanning 40 years, tracking the Stark family's activities with the precision of a professional investigation. Lee moved to the desk where a letter lay, addressed to him in Edwin's handwriting. With shaking hands, he opened it and began to read aloud. "Dear Lee, if you're reading this, you've survived their mockery and found your way here with your father. Good boy. I knew you would. What you see around you is 40 years of work. The Starks hired me when I was young to install security systems in their mansion, their galleries, their storage facilities. They thought I was just a simple locksmith, too stupid to understand what I was seeing. They were wrong. I've documented everything. Every illegal auction, every forged provenance, every stolen artifact they've moved through their network. The Stark family built their fortune on theft and fraud, hiding behind their reputation and old name. I couldn't go to the police. The Starks own half the department, and their lawyers would bury any accusation. But I could keep records. I could wait. I could ensure that someday, someone I trusted would have the proof to bring them down. Lee, your father is a good man. He's stronger than the Starks have ever let him believe. Show him these files. Help him understand what he's been living with. And together, decide what justice looks like. The key you hold opens more than this door. There are 6 storage units in this building, each containing original evidence. There's a safe deposit box at First National with financial records. There's a digital archive on the computer in the office. Everything you need to destroy the Starks is here. The question is, what will you do with it? I love you, boy. Make me proud. Great-Grandpa Edwin. The silence that followed was profound. Vernon Reed had moved to examine the photographs, his face growing paler with each image. Ryan stood frozen, his mind reeling. This is impossible, Vernon whispered. The Stark family, they're pillars of the community. They donate to museums, they serve on boards. They're criminals, Ryan said flatly. And my grandfather spent 40 years proving it. Lee looked up at his father, the rusty key still in his hand. What do we do, Dad? Ryan moved through the lobby, opening doors, finding an office with a computer humming quietly, a conference room with more files, storage rooms stacked with carefully labeled boxes. It was overwhelming, a lifetime of meticulous documentation, all waiting to be deployed. But against whom? His wife's family, his son's grandparents. The people who'd mocked them yesterday were the same people who'd built their empire on lies and theft. Mr. McCann, Vernon said carefully, if even half of this is legitimate evidence, the implications are significant. But you need to understand, the Starks have resources, connections, lawyers who've never lost a case. Going public with this could be dangerous. Or it could be justice, Ryan countered. He sat at Edwin's desk and booted up the computer. The password was Lee's birthday. Inside were folders organized by year, by crime, by family member. Edwin had been thorough to the point of obsession. One folder caught Ryan's eye, Operation Mockingbird. Inside was a detailed plan, written in Edwin's hand, outlining a strategy for exposing the Starks. But it wasn't a simple evidence dump. It was sophisticated, targeting their reputation, their business connections, their carefully constructed lies, one by one. They'll fight back, Edwin had written. They'll use their money and power. So you can't just show the world what they are. You have to make them confess it themselves. You have to trap them in their own greed. Ryan leaned back in the chair, his mind racing. He could go to the police, hand over everything, let the system work. But Vernon was right. The Starks had spent decades building connections, paying off the right people, creating layers of legal protection. Or he could do what Edwin had planned. Something smarter. Something that would use their arrogance against them. Dad, Lee's voice pulled him back. Great-Grandpa wanted us to make them pay, didn't he? He wanted us to deliver justice, Ryan corrected gently. There's a difference. But even as he said it, he felt the anger burning in his chest. The years of condescension, of being treated as less than, of watching Christy slowly transform into her mother. The humiliation in that library yesterday, Lee's tears, their laughter. Vernon cleared his throat. I should mention something. Edwin asked me to be here as a witness, but also as your attorney if you chose to proceed with whatever you decide. He paid a substantial retainer 20 years ago, updated it regularly. Legally, I'm bound to represent you in any matter related to this estate. And morally? Ryan asked. Where do you stand? Vernon was quiet for a long moment, studying the photographs on the wall. I've represented the Stark family for 30 years. I've watched them destroy businesses, ruin competitors, and walk away clean every time. If Edwin McCann spent 40 years documenting actual crimes, he met Ryan's eyes. Then morally, I stand with the truth. Ryan stood and walked to the window overlooking the river. The morning sun was higher now, burning off the mist. Somewhere across town, the Starks were probably having brunch, laughing about yesterday's entertainment, never imagining that a rusty key had just unlocked their downfall. Lee, Ryan said, go through the timeline. Vernon, examine the files for legal validity. I need to understand exactly what we have before we decide how to use it. They worked through the morning, each new discovery more damning than the last. The Starks weren't just smuggling stolen art. They were running an international network, using their legitimate galleries as fronts. Gordon had connections to forgers in 3 countries. Carlton had been selling fake provenances to museums for 20 years. Even Maxine was involved, her charitable foundation laundering money from illegal sales. And Christy? Ryan found a folder with her name around noon, his hands shaking as he opened it. She was listed as unknowing participant, used as a cover for Carlton's meetings, her innocent presence lending legitimacy to illegal deals. Edwin had been careful to document that she had no knowledge of the crimes. Protection for Lee, Ryan realized. One last kindness from a man who'd thought of everything. It's all here, Vernon said finally, his voice awed. Financial records, photographs, testimony from Edwin about the security systems he installed and what they were really protecting. Shipping manifests for stolen goods. Insurance fraud documentation. Money laundering trails. This isn't just evidence, it's a prosecutor's dream. Then why didn't Edwin go to the police? Lee asked. Ryan knew the answer. He'd found it in another letter, this one addressed to Vernon, explaining everything. The Starks had purchased their immunity carefully over decades. Police commissioners, judges, district attorneys, all influenced or owned. Edwin had tried once, 20 years ago, and nearly been arrested himself for breaking and entering. They'd discredited him, threatened his livelihood, made it clear that a simple locksmith would never touch them. So he'd waited. He'd documented. He'd prepared. And he'd placed his faith in his grandson-in-law, the man the Starks had spent years trying to break. Ryan pulled out his phone and made a call he'd been considering all morning. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Detective Dwayne Norton. Dwayne, it's Ryan McCann. We worked together on that construction fraud case 5 years ago. Ryan, haven't heard from you in ages. What's going on? I need to talk to you about something big. Very big. But not officially, not yet. Can we meet? There was a pause. How big? Big enough that I need someone I trust before I involve the department. Another pause, longer this time. Riverside Diner. 1 hour. Come alone. Ryan hung up and turned to find Lee and Vernon watching him. We're going to do this right, he said. Edwin didn't build this case for revenge. He built it for justice. We're going to give the Starks exactly what they deserve, but we're going to do it legally, thoroughly, and in a way they can't escape. What about Mom? Lee asked quietly. It was the question Ryan had been avoiding. Christy was technically innocent according to Edwin's files, but she was still a Stark. Still part of the family that had built its fortune on crime. Still the woman who'd stood by yesterday while her family humiliated their son. We protect her as much as we can, Ryan said finally. But Lee, you need to understand, your mother is going to have to choose. And she might not choose us. Lee's jaw tightened, but he nodded. At 11 years old, he was learning hard lessons about family, loyalty, and the cost of truth. The meeting with Dwayne Norton was tense. The detective listened with increasing disbelief as Ryan outlined what Edwin had discovered, offering to show him just enough evidence to prove the case was real. Dwayne had his own history with the Starks. They'd blocked his investigation into an art theft 3 years ago, using political pressure to shut him down. If this is real, Dwayne said slowly, if even a quarter of what you're saying is documented, Ryan, this would be the biggest case this city has ever seen. It's real, all of it. But we need to be smart. The Starks will fight back with everything they have. Dwayne leaned back, his detective's mind clearly working through scenarios. We need the FBI. Art crimes, international smuggling, it's federal jurisdiction. And we need to move fast once we start. The moment the Starks know we're coming, they'll destroy evidence, flee the country, call in every favor they've accumulated. How fast could you mobilize? With what you're describing, I could have federal agents here in 48 hours. But Ryan, Dwayne's expression grew serious. Your wife is a Stark. You live in their house half the time. They're going to see this as betrayal. They betrayed themselves, Ryan said quietly. I'm just delivering the bill. They spent the afternoon planning. Vernon provided the legal framework, Dwayne the law enforcement strategy, and Ryan the insider knowledge of Stark family dynamics. By evening, they had a timeline. 3 days to verify the most critical evidence, then simultaneous raids on the Stark mansion, their galleries, and their storage facilities. But Ryan had one more element to add to the plan, something Edwin had outlined in Operation Mockingbird, that would ensure the Starks couldn't claim innocence or buy their way out. He would make them confess. When Ryan returned home that night, Christy was in the living room with her parents and Carlton. The intervention was predictable. We need to talk about yesterday, Gordon began, his voice carrying that tone of authority he used when dealing with subordinates. You embarrassed Christie by leaving so abruptly. Lee was crying, Ryan said flatly. Children are resilient. Maxine waved a dismissive hand. He'll forget about it. But the way you stormed out. What did you find? Carlton interrupted, his eyes sharp. At that address. The key must have opened something. Ryan had prepared for this question. An old storage unit. Some of Edwin's tools, personal effects. Nothing valuable. I told you. Christie said, relief in her voice. Just sentiment. But Carlton wasn't satisfied. What address exactly? Why does it matter? Humor me. Ryan recognized the danger sign, Carlton's casual tone hiding genuine interest. Whatever had made Edwin watch the Starks for 40 years, it had made them wary in return. They'd thought him harmless, but some part of them had never been entirely sure. Riverside Drive, Ryan said. A storage facility. Like I said, just tools and old locks. Carlton exchanged a glance with his father. That building. Edwin owned it. Apparently. It's part of the estate. We should buy it from you, Gordon said suddenly. The property value in that area is increasing. We'll give you a fair price. Ryan felt his pulse quicken. They wanted it. Whatever Edwin had documented, the Starks had some awareness that he might have kept records. They'd probably felt safe with him alive. He was too old, too weak to pose a threat. But now that he was dead, and his grandson-in-law had access to his properties, I haven't decided what to do with it yet, Ryan said carefully. Name your price, Carlton pressed. Seriously, we'll write a check today. Why? Ryan asked. It's just an old warehouse. Investment diversification, Gordon said smoothly. The Stark portfolio includes several properties in that district. Consolidation makes sense. They were lying, and they knew he knew it. But what they didn't know was what he'd found, what he had planned, or how close their world was to collapsing. I'll think about it, Ryan said. After they left, Christie turned on him. Why would you refuse? They're offering to buy a worthless building. Take the money, Ryan. God knows we could use it. It was your great-grandfather-in-law's property. Lee should have a say. He's 11. He's old enough to deserve respect. Something your family seems incapable of giving. The fight escalated from there, ending with Christie sleeping in their bedroom and Ryan back in the guest room. But he didn't mind. He lay awake, making plans, refining strategies, thinking through every angle. Tomorrow, he'd introduce one more element to the trap. And the Starks, in their arrogance and greed, would walk right into it. The next morning, Ryan called Carlton directly. I've been thinking about your offer. For the Riverside property. Excellent. Carlton sounded eager. Should we meet? Discuss terms. Actually, I had another idea. I'm going through Edwin's things, cataloging items from his workshop. Some of the pieces are genuine antiques, Victorian locks, old safes, that sort of thing. Your family deals in antiques. Maybe you could evaluate them. Tell me what's worth selling. There was a pause. Carlton was smart enough to be suspicious, but not smart enough to resist. What kind of pieces? Locks from historic buildings, some European imports. Edwin kept detailed records of their provenance. Apparently, he acquired them from estate sales over the years. The magic word, provenance. For the Stark family business, provenance was everything. The documentation proving an item's history and legitimacy. Real provenance was hard to forge, which was why they employed experts and why Edwin's mention of detailed records would be irresistible. I could take a look, Carlton said carefully. When? This afternoon? At the Riverside building. Most of the items are still stored there. Ryan could almost hear Carlton's mind working. A chance to see inside the building, to assess what Edwin might have kept, all under the guise of helping his brother-in-law with antiques. 3 o'clock, Carlton agreed. Ryan spent the morning preparing. With Vernon's help, they wired the conference room for audio and video. Dwayne Norton provided the equipment, technically illegal without a warrant, but Ryan wasn't recording for evidence. He was recording for leverage. Lee helped arrange the antiques, actual Victorian locks from Edwin's collection, mixed with files carefully disguised as inventory records. To a casual observer, it looked like an old locksmith's hoard. To someone looking closer, there were hints of something more. Carlton arrived exactly on time, accompanied by a woman Ryan didn't recognize, Cara Wise, apparently an art appraiser the Starks used regularly. They walked through the lobby, Carlton's eyes cataloging everything, looking for threats. Interesting space, Carlton said. Edwin certainly kept it maintained. He was meticulous about his properties. They entered the conference room where the antiques were displayed. Kara immediately began examining the locks, her expert eye assessing value. Carlton, meanwhile, wandered to the windows, to the file cabinets, casually trying drawer handles. These are locked, he noted. Private files. Edwin's old business records. Still seems excessive. What could a locksmith need to keep locked away? Ryan shrugged. He was careful about client confidentiality. Installed security systems for wealthy families, you know. Probably didn't want their details public. Something shifted in Carlton's expression. Did he keep records? Of the installations? Detailed ones. Schematics, key codes, the works. All secured, of course. Of course. Carlton moved closer to the cabinets. You know, client information like that could be valuable. Security consultants would pay for historical data on older systems. I could introduce you to some people, help you monetize these records. And there it was, Carlton probing to see what Ryan knew, what he had, whether Edwin's files posed a threat. That's thoughtful, Ryan said. But I'm thinking of keeping everything sealed. Out of respect for Edwin's client's privacy. Carlton's smile was thin. Privacy is admirable. But sometimes old information is worthless. Better to profit from it while you can, before it becomes completely irrelevant. Or, Kara interjected, oblivious to the undercurrent. Some of these locks are museum quality. The 1847 Rothschild safe lock alone could sell for $30,000 at auction. The number scratched on the rusty key. Ryan watched Carlton's face and saw the flicker of recognition. 1847, Carlton repeated. That's an unusual date for a lock design. It's the year the design was patented, Kara explained. Very rare to find one in this condition. But Carlton wasn't listening to her. He was looking at Ryan, and Ryan saw the moment understanding clicked. The key's number wasn't an address. It was a code, a message, a reference. 1847 Rothschild. A lock made for securing valuables, for keeping secrets. I need some air, Carlton said suddenly. Kara, finish the evaluation. I'll be outside. The moment he left, Ryan knew Carlton would make a call. Sure enough, through the window, he saw his brother-in-law on his phone, pacing, agitated. The trap was working. Carlton suspected the files existed, but didn't know what they contained or how damaging they might be. The uncertainty would drive him to action. 20 minutes later, Kara finished her assessment. The locks were indeed valuable, worth roughly $200,000 collectively. Carlton returned, his composure restored but his eyes calculating. Ryan, I have a proposal, he said. Sell me the building. I'll pay market value plus 20%. And these antique locks, I'll purchase them as well. Call it $500,000 total. $500,000. More money than Ryan had ever been offered in his life. Enough to leave Christie, start fresh, give Lee the life the Starks promised but never delivered. Why? Ryan asked simply. Because family helps family. And because. Carlton hesitated, then committed. Because I think Edwin kept files on the Stark family security systems. Detailed files. That information in the wrong hands could be a liability. I'm offering to eliminate that liability cleanly. What makes you think Edwin kept files on your family? He installed every lock and security system in our properties for 30 years. He was obsessive about documentation. And he never liked us, Ryan. You know that. He thought we looked down on him, on you. You did look down on us. Carlton didn't deny it. Perhaps. But that doesn't change the offer. $500,000. Cash. Today. You walk away, we handle any complications in Edwin's records. Ryan pretended to consider it. Lee was depending on him to be smart, to be strong, to honor Edwin's memory. But he also needed to make Carlton believe the offer was tempting. I need to think about it, Ryan said finally. Think fast, Carlton replied, his mask slipping slightly. Because if Edwin's files contain information about our security systems, and if that information found its way to, say, competitors or thieves, well, that would make you liable for not securing the data properly. Civil litigation could cost you everything. There it was, the veiled threat. Carlton was acknowledging the file's existence without directly admitting what they contained. He was trying to scare Ryan into selling while simultaneously trying to buy his silence. 24 hours, Ryan said. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. After they left, Ryan sagged against the conference table. Vernon emerged from the office where he'd been watching on monitors. He suspects, Vernon said. He knows something exists. But he doesn't know what, or how complete it is. That's what we need. Them scared enough to make mistakes, but not scared enough to run. That evening, Ryan told Christy about Carlton's offer. Her eyes widened at the amount. $500,000? Ryan, that's life-changing money. We could pay off the mortgage, finally take that vacation, send Lee to private school. Your brother wants to buy the building because he's afraid of what Edwin documented. Christy's enthusiasm faltered. What do you mean? Edwin kept records. Detailed records. Of everything he saw while working for your family. Working for? Ryan, what are you talking about? He studied his wife's face, searching for any sign that she knew. But there was only confusion, genuine and complete. Edwin had been right. Christy was innocent of her family's crimes, used as an unwitting prop. Your family isn't what you think they are, Ryan said gently. Edwin discovered things. Bad things. And he documented them. That's ridiculous. My family, they're respected, successful. They're criminals, Christy. And in 48 hours, the FBI is going to prove it. Her face went white. You can't be serious. Ryan pulled out his phone and showed her photographs. Just a few. Enough to make the point. Gordon accepting a briefcase from a known forger. Carlton at an auction house raided for trafficking stolen antiquities. Maxine signing documents for artwork later discovered to be fakes. Christy stared at the images, her world visibly crumbling. No, there has to be an explanation. My father wouldn't. Your father built his fortune on fraud and theft. Your whole family did. And Edwin McCann spent 40 years proving it. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Why are you telling me this? Because you have to choose. In 2 days, your family is going to be arrested. You can distance yourself now, or you can go down with them. They're my family. I'm your family. Lee is your family. We're the ones who've been loyal to you, who've stood by you, who've loved you even when you turned into someone we barely recognize. Christy stood abruptly, her hands shaking. I need to warn them. I need to tell my father. If you do that, you become an accessory. Obstruction of justice. You'd be choosing to help criminals cover up their crimes. They're my parents. And I'm your husband. Lee is your son. Where does your loyalty lie? It was the moment of truth, and Ryan watched his wife struggle with it. Years of privilege, of being a Stark with everything that entailed, warred against the evidence before her eyes, the reality of her family's corruption. I can't, she whispered finally. I can't choose between you and them. Then you've already chosen, Ryan said sadly. Because silence protects them, not us. She left that night, packing a bag and going to her parents' mansion. Lee watched from his bedroom window, his face pressed to the glass, and Ryan stood behind him, one hand on his son's shoulder. Is Mom coming back? Lee asked. I don't know, buddy. I honestly don't know. The next day, Dwayne Norton called. We're ready. FBI is in position. We move tomorrow at dawn, synchronized raids on all Stark properties. But Ryan, there's something you should know. Carlton Stark just applied for emergency passports for the entire family. They're planning to run. When? Unclear. But they've booked a private charter leaving for Switzerland in 72 hours. We need to move now, before they can flee. Ryan made a decision. Accelerate the timeline. Tonight. Dwayne sounded skeptical. That's fast, even for us. Carlton knows I'm sitting on something. He's offered to buy it, threatened me, and now he's planning to run. If we wait, they'll disappear, and all of Edwin's work will be for nothing. There was a pause, then, I'll make it happen. But you and Lee need to be somewhere safe when this goes down. The Starks will know it was you. Ryan had already thought of that. He'd moved Lee to a hotel that morning, registered under Vernon Reed's name. Now he made one final call, to Carlton. I've made my decision about the building, Ryan said. Carlton's relief was audible. And I want to meet. Tonight. At the Stark mansion. I want the cash in hand, and I want the whole family there. If I'm selling out Edwin's legacy, I want everyone to know exactly what I'm doing. It was a calculated risk. Carlton would be suspicious of the drama, but his greed would override caution. The chance to secure the building and eliminate any evidence before fleeing the country would be too tempting. 9 o'clock, Carlton agreed. We'll have everything ready. Ryan hung up and looked at Vernon, who'd been listening. They'll have the money. They'll have something, Vernon said. But Ryan, walking into that house tonight, is the only way to keep them there until the FBI arrives. Dwayne said raids start at midnight. I just need to keep the Starks occupied for 3 hours. And if they get violent? If they realize it's a trap? Ryan thought of Lee's tears, of Edwin's 40 years of patient documentation, of every humiliation he'd endured from these people who thought their money made them untouchable. Then they'll learn what happens when you underestimate a McCann, he said quietly. At 8:45 p.m., Ryan pulled up to the Stark mansion. Every window blazed with light. The family was gathering, ready to celebrate their victory over the locksmith's grandson who'd finally been bought. Vernon had wanted to come, but Ryan had refused. This confrontation needed to be personal. Besides, someone had to be with Lee to explain what happened if things went wrong. Carlton met him at the door, unusually jovial. "Ryan, come in, come in. We have champagne ready to celebrate our deal." The family was assembled in the library, the same room where they'd mocked Lee 4 days ago. Gordon sat in his wing chair, Maxine beside him, both wearing expressions of satisfaction. Melody was there too, and several family associates Ryan recognized from various Stark events. But no Christy. His wife had made her choice, it seemed, but couldn't bear to watch this final betrayal. "Before we begin," Gordon said, "the money." He gestured to a briefcase on the desk. $500,000 in cash, as promised. "Count it if you like." Ryan opened the briefcase, his hands steady. The money was real. They'd need it for their escape, probably, and figured buying Ryan's silence was cheaper than the risk he posed. "Satisfactory?" Carlton asked. "It's a lot of money," Ryan acknowledged. "Life-changing money." "Indeed. All we need are the keys to the Riverside property and your signature on a few documents transferring ownership. Vernon Reed prepared them, I believe." Ryan pulled the documents from his jacket. Vernon had prepared them, but not the ones Carlton expected. These were copies of Edwin's evidence index, carefully selected to show the Stark family exactly what existed. He laid them on the desk, watching Carlton's face as he started reading. The color drained from his brother-in-law's features. "What is this?" Carlton's voice was strangled. "Edwin McCann's insurance policy," Ryan said calmly. 40 years of documentation proving your family built its fortune on fraud, theft, and smuggling. Gordon stood abruptly. "This is absurd. Edwin was a locksmith, nothing more." "He was a locksmith you trusted with your security systems," Ryan interrupted. "Every lock, every safe, every hidden storage facility. He saw everything, documented everything, and kept it all secure until someone he trusted could use it." "You're bluffing," Maxine said, but her voice wavered. Ryan pulled out his phone and started projecting photographs onto the library wall using the room's smart TV system. He paired his device earlier during a family dinner weeks ago. The images appeared in crisp detail: financial transactions, shipping manifests, photographs of illegal deals. "Stop this." Carlton lunged for the TV, but Ryan had already switched to the next set of images. "The FBI has copies of everything," Ryan continued. "They're reviewing the evidence right now. In fact," he checked his watch, "they should be arriving in about 15 minutes to arrest you all." The room erupted. Melody screamed. Maxine grabbed her phone. Gordon's face turned purple with rage. "You can't prove any of this," Gordon roared. "We have lawyers, connections. Edwin's files include testimony from his 40 years of working with you. Sworn affidavits he prepared before he died. Physical evidence from security systems he maintained. Financial records he copied when you weren't looking. He was a locksmith, Gordon. He knew how to get into places without being noticed." Carlton moved toward Ryan, his fists clenched, but froze when Ryan pulled out his phone again. "Everything happening right now is being recorded and live-streamed to Detective Dwayne Norton. If anything happens to me, it becomes evidence of intimidation and assault." "You son of a bitch," Carlton hissed. "We welcomed you into this family. You tolerated me because I made Christy happy, and you've spent 8 years making sure I knew my place. Well, Edwin taught me something about locks and keys. Sometimes the simplest mechanism is the strongest. And he built a lock around your crimes that you'll never escape." Sirens began to wail in the distance. Maxine's face crumbled. "This will destroy us. The scandal, the shame. You destroyed yourselves," Ryan said. "Every forged painting, every stolen artifact, every illegal deal. Edwin just documented it." "We'll fight this," Gordon said, but his voice had lost its authority. "We'll tie this up in courts for years." "With what money?" Ryan asked. "The FBI is seizing your accounts right now. Your lawyers will drop you the moment they see the evidence. And your connections? Most of them are about to be arrested too. Edwin tracked your entire network. The sirens grew louder. Through the windows, Ryan saw police cars and unmarked vehicles pulling up the driveway, surrounding the mansion. Carlton made one last desperate attempt. The money. Take it. Take all of it, and the building. Just tell them you made a mistake, that the evidence isn't real. The evidence is real. Edwin's work was real. And justice, finally, is real. The front door burst open. Federal agents in tactical gear poured into the mansion, followed by Dwayne Norton and a woman Ryan didn't recognize. FBI Special Agent Antoinette Hull, according to her badge. Gordon Stark, Carlton Stark, Maxine Stark, Agent Hull announced, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, trafficking in stolen goods, international smuggling, and about 40 other charges I'll explain in detail at the federal building." The arrests were efficient and professional. Gordon tried to argue, threatening lawsuits and calling for his lawyer. Carlton remained silent, his eyes fixed on Ryan with pure hatred. Maxine wept as the handcuffs clicked closed. Agent Hull approached Ryan. "Mr. McCann, we'll need you to come with us to provide a statement." "Of course. But first," Ryan turned to the remaining family associates, who'd been frozen in shock throughout the confrontation. "You might want to call your lawyers. If you had any dealings with the Stark family business, the FBI will want to talk to you too." They scattered like roaches when the lights came on. Outside, news vans were already arriving, cameras filming as the Stark family was let out in handcuffs. It would be the lead story by morning, the fall of one of the city's oldest, most respected families. Dwayne Norton pulled Ryan aside. "That was reckless, keeping them talking until we arrived. It was necessary, and I had backup." Ryan gestured to his phone. Vernon was listening the whole time, ready to send in cavalry if needed. "Edwin trained you well," Dwayne said with a slight smile. "You're every bit as patient and thorough as he was." At the federal building, Ryan spent 4 hours providing detailed testimony about Edwin's files, the Riverside property, and his interactions with the Stark family. Agent Hull was impressed by the organization of the evidence. "Your grandfather was methodical," she said. "Most of our work is already done. We'll be building cases for years based on his documentation." "He wanted to see justice," Ryan said. "He just didn't live long enough to deliver it himself. So he trusted you to finish it. That's quite a legacy." It was nearly 4 a.m. when Ryan finally left the federal building. Vernon was waiting with Lee, both looking exhausted but relieved. "Dad," Lee ran to him, and Ryan caught him in a fierce hug. "It's over," Ryan murmured. "Great-grandpa's work is done. What about Mom?" Lee asked quietly. Ryan had wondered the same thing. Christy had been at her parents' house when the arrests happened. Her status as an unwitting participant was documented, but she'd still spent the night answering questions. Her world shattered. "We'll figure it out," Ryan promised. Together, the following days were a media circus. The Stark case dominated every news cycle as more details emerged. Art museums, auction houses, and private collectors came forward with evidence of forged provenances and stolen goods. The scope of the Stark family's criminal enterprise stunned even seasoned investigators. Gordon, Carlton, and Maxine were denied bail, flight risk, and the Swiss charter confirmed their intent to flee. Melody cooperated immediately, providing testimony in exchange for immunity. Other family members scrambled to distance themselves, some successfully proving they'd been kept in the dark. Christy finally came home on the third day after the arrests. She looked hollow, aged by the revelations about her family. "I didn't know," she said, standing in the doorway of their house like a stranger. "I swear, Ryan, I didn't know any of it." "I believe you. Edwin documented that you were innocent. But I chose them over you. When you told me the truth, I ran to warn them." "You couldn't," Ryan corrected. "You thought about it, but you didn't. That choice matters." She sank onto the sofa, crying in a way Ryan had never seen. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from losing everything she believed about her family, her identity, her world. "They're going to prison, aren't they?" she asked finally. "Yes. For a long time." "Good." The word came out fierce and broken. "I'm sorry, but good. What they did, the people they hurt, my God, Ryan, they stole from museums, from Holocaust survivors' families. My mother was selling art stolen from Jewish families during the war. How do I live with that? You're not responsible for their crimes. But I benefited from them. Every privilege, every opportunity, it was all built on suffering." Ryan sat beside her. Then use those opportunities differently. The Stark name is ruined, but you can rebuild as Christy McCann. You can show Lee that mistakes don't define you. How you respond to them does. She looked at him through tears. After everything, why are you being kind to me? Because Lee needs his mother. And because somewhere in the woman who married me 8 years ago is the person I fell in love with. Maybe this is her chance to come back. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet. But it was a beginning. The trial took place 8 months later. Federal prosecutors presented Edwin's evidence methodically, piece by piece, building an unassailable case. Defense lawyers tried every tactic, but the documentation was too thorough, too comprehensive. Ryan attended every day, Lee beside him, both honoring Edwin's memory by seeing his work through to its conclusion. Vernon Reed testified as executor of Edwin's estate, explaining how the old locksmith had spent decades building his case with the precision he'd brought to every lock he'd ever made. The verdicts came down on a Friday afternoon, guilty on all counts. Gordon Stark received 25 years. Carlton got 18. Maxine, 15. By the time they were eligible for parole, they'd be elderly, broken, and forgotten. The civil suits came next, museums seeking restitution, families wanting their stolen heritage returned, collectors demanding compensation for forgeries. The Stark Empire was dismantled piece by piece, assets seized and liquidated to pay victims. The Riverside Drive property, however, remained untouched. It belonged to Edwin's estate, and therefore to Lee. Ryan had plans for it. 9 months after the arrests, on what would have been Edwin's 88th birthday, Ryan and Lee stood in the renovated building's lobby. Where photographs of Stark crimes had once hung, there were now pictures of Edwin at work, teaching Lee about locks, helping community members with security issues, volunteering at the youth center. Above the entrance, a new sign read, Edwin McCann Center for Youth Development. The building now housed after-school programs, job training, mentorship initiatives, all funded by the sale of Edwin's antique lock collection and managed by a foundation in his name. It was everything the old man had believed in. Honest work, second chances, and the idea that everyone deserved security and opportunity. Lee cut the ribbon, his hands steady on the scissors Edwin had used in his workshop for 40 years. Ryan stood beside him, Vernon on the other side, and Dwayne Norton representing the department that had finally brought the Starks to justice. Christy was there too, standing apart from the crowd, but present nonetheless. She'd spent the past months in therapy, working through her family's betrayal and her own complicity through silence. She and Ryan were separated but civil, co-parenting Lee with a care that surprised them both. Whether they'd find their way back to each other remained uncertain, but they'd agreed that Lee's well-being came first. Your great-grandfather would be proud, Ryan told Lee as the crowd applauded. He already knew, Lee said, touching the rusty key that hung on a chain around his neck, the key that had unlocked everything. That's why he left it to me. He knew we'd do the right thing. That evening, after the ceremony, Ryan sat in Edwin's old workshop, which he'd kept exactly as it was. The tools were arranged with meticulous care, each in its place. On the workbench was a letter Ryan had found only recently, tucked inside Edwin's personal journal. Dear Ryan, if you're reading this, you've opened the final lock. The Starks are finished, justice is served, and my life's work is complete. I wish I could have seen it, but I'm old and tired, and some battles belong to the next generation. I want you to understand something about locks and keys. Most people think a lock's purpose is to keep people out. But that's only half the story. The real purpose of a lock is to protect what matters, to ensure that the right person, with the right key, at the right time, can access what needs protecting. I gave Lee that rusty key because I knew you'd both have the courage to use it. I documented the Starks' crimes because someone needed to protect their victims. I built this case because justice matters more than comfort, truth matters more than reputation, and doing right matters more than being accepted. You've spent years being made to feel small by people who mistook wealth for worth. I watched it happen, and it broke my heart. But I also watched you raise Lee with integrity, work with honor, and never lose your decency, even when surrounded by corruption. That's why you were the right key, Ryan. Not because you were the strongest or the richest or the most connected, but because you understood that some doors need to be opened, no matter the cost. I'm proud to have known you. I'm proud to call you my grandson. and I'm proud that my final work will be carried out by someone who values justice as much as I do. Teach Lee about locks, about keys, about the patience required to solve complex problems. Teach him that being a McCann means more than bloodlines. It means standing for something, even when standing alone. And Ryan, don't let bitterness consume you. The Starks will get what they deserve, but you deserve happiness. Find it, build it, lock it away safely so no one can steal it from you again. With all my love and respect, Edwin. Ryan folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the journal. Outside, the city lights twinkled in the gathering darkness. Somewhere across town, the Stark family sat in federal prison cells, their empire dust. Somewhere closer, Lee was probably researching locks on his computer, continuing the legacy Edwin had started. And here in this workshop, surrounded by the tools of an honest trade and the memory of a good man, Ryan McCann felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. The rusty key had unlocked more than a building or evidence against criminals. It had unlocked a truth Edwin had always known: that real wealth wasn't measured in mansions or bank accounts, but in integrity, justice, and the courage to use whatever key you were given to open the doors that needed opening. 3 years later, Ryan stood on the steps of the Edwin McCann Center, watching Lee, now 14, teach a group of younger kids about basic lock mechanisms. The boy had his great-grandfather's patience, his careful hands, his instinctive understanding that every lock told a story. The Stark family name had faded from public consciousness, replaced by newer scandals and other fallen empires. But their victims had been compensated, stolen artifacts returned to rightful owners, and families who'd lost precious heirlooms to theft finally found justice. Ryan had sold the hardware store and now ran the center full-time, creating opportunities for kids who reminded him of himself: smart, capable, underestimated. Vernon Reed served on the foundation board, as did Dwayne Norton, now promoted to captain. Christy had moved to another city, starting fresh with a new career in nonprofit work. She and Ryan had finalized their divorce amicably, and she visited Lee regularly. The bitterness had faded, replaced by mutual respect and shared commitment to their son's future. "Dad," Lee called out, holding up a particularly complex lock. "This is a Brahma. Great-grandpa had one in his collection. Did you know they were considered unpickable for decades?" "Until someone invented the right key," Ryan replied, walking over to examine it with his son. Lee grinned, the same grin Edwin had worn when explaining the beauty of a well-made mechanism. "Everything has a key. You just have to be patient enough to find it." Ryan put his arm around his son's shoulders, looking at the building that bore Edwin's name, thinking of the justice they'd delivered and the lives they'd changed. "Your great-grandfather was right about everything," Ryan said. "Keys meant something, and he gave us the most important one of all, the key to doing what's right, no matter the cost." In his pocket, Ryan carried his own key now, one he'd had made from Edwin's original design, the number 1847 engraved on it. It opened nothing physical, but it reminded him daily of the moment everything changed. The moment a rusty key stopped being just metal and became a legacy. The moment the McCann family proved that the simplest lock, built with patience and precision, could protect the most valuable treasure of all: truth, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a grandfather, a father, and a son who understood that some inheritances are worth more than gold. They are worth everything. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.